Good morning.
Hey,
Well,
Hey.
it's never been a better time to be alive as a mouse. I just read they figured out how to reverse aging in mice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they get the best medical care. I tell you, Frode, sometimes you wonder.
That's quite funny.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a little sense of humor back. It helps.
That's important. That's for sure.
And it's nice. All the crocuses are starting to bloom outside, so that's cheering me up a little too.
Good, good. I just saw, by the way, Mark will be here in a moment, so that's a good thing. Oh, hang on. I'll just pause, mute myself for a second.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry about that. That was my mother not realizing the time. So how are you keeping up? How are you holding up? How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I'm trying to get back in the saddle and do more coding again. I have a lot of progress I'm making in the user interface framework with IMBA. I just ironed out having tabs so that the tabs can appear on any border around a tab panel, and they can be rounded or not rounded, shadowed or not shadowed, with the text appearing horizontally or vertically. And if the text is displayed vertically, it can be sideways, oriented upright, and the whole thing's highly parameterized so that I can have all kinds of different overlay panels, and I can use different borders for different functions. So it opens up a lot of possibilities for interesting control widgets down the road.
Sounds good. And I look forward to when you're going to be doing things in VR as well. So that's going to be interesting when Peter makes the jump. I saw Mark has started doing some Noda imports, and he's finding it really, really difficult, which is a really interesting learning curve for us, of course, on how to deal with that kind of thing. So that's cool. How are you doing, Fabian?
I don't know. I'm doing okay, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Did you see the latest issue of our esteemed journal?
No.
Oh, you have to look. You're in there, obviously.
I think I skimmed through, but there were quite a few exchanges. So I'm not sure which is what. There were multiple documents. The last one I saw was just like a dozen pages, so I don't think that was it.
No. That was not it. Hang on. I'm gonna send you the link, the download link. Put it here in the chat.
Yes, the last document that I was going through was the glossary-based thinking space.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's something I sent this morning, which would be interesting to discuss, of course. Hi, Adam and Alan.
Yeah.
It's nice when there's a rhyming to the two names when you join together. Makes it easier for everyone.
That's how we planned it.
Good. Anyone have any comments on this month's journal? It's useful to see if there's anything we should do different going forward, just to kind of go through it a little bit.
It could be good to add the source when the content is remediated from Twitter or email, just to add that it came from email or came from Twitter, and also add dates if possible. It's not always possible to do that, of course, if it's a long conversation spanning over the whole month. But I mean, if we want to put it on a timeline, it could also be interesting when when during the month it was submitted. So I'm not really sure how we encode it, but at least put it into text, and we will make sure that we encode it later on, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting issue. The layout of the journal is at the very end, we have the resources section, which is just any cool links, and that's simple. Everything else is actually chronological, but it doesn't have the dates. And if we're going to have, I mean, first of all, I agree with you, just wondering how to do it, because if it's an email or a tweet, then the first date, of course, it's relatively easy to add. But if we're, we take our time. So if something is a day later, an hour later, when do we add it? Definitely something we need to reflect on. But also, we have written that it's a conversation. We should also write where it's from, as you said. Just writing that in our notes. Of course, it's easier for us if you just write an article, even if the article is as short as that.
What are the goals for the journal other than a record?
For me, 3 goals. 1, record. 2, get money. So we can show we're producing a tangible, continuous thing. When I'm saying get money, essentially to hire some people to do the boring stuff, so that the people doing different things can do it, and we can have some infrastructure stuff done. And also to have a place to experiment around. Mark, just really briefly, Adam pointed out a good thing about the journal. It would be nice if when we scrape from email or Twitter, we say where it came from explicitly, and also to some degree the date of when at least the first post was made.
Yeah, all makes sense to me. Yeah.
I think we should try to do that with articles too, because we publish once a month, but if there's an article on this date, on that date, we should try to do that. Okay, makes sense.
Okay, it's good to get the goals there. I like that. If the goals were, if there were tests you were going to run, like how many people are looking at this, how many people are interested, then I would definitely encourage setting up some kind of metrics for that, right? Like downloads or something else. And then if the goal was to actually get people engaged in it, then I would definitely encourage a non-PDF version of the same thing, right?
Yeah, well, we are going to have your email newsletter, so that'll be an important component. And one of the things funding will help with is social media outreach, because we do want more and more people to know what we're doing. I think it's really good to have 2 journals, so they are kind of tangible things that we have. I also look forward to, as we have them, when you guys have done demos that you are okay with posting. When they are at a stable point, we obviously need to share that as well. As far as having it in a non-PDF form, I think that is a really interesting discussion. I'm a bit wary of having the same thing in many media and different locations. But Brandel has been looking at taking the native author document into VR, simply because it is a very open format. It is on a Mac, documents are basically containers. So when you open that up, there's plists and JSON files for all the different items. So that means you can easily extract stuff. So I will fight a lot. Obviously we'll have a dialogue of having the core thing be the PDF. But I don't mind also having a thing in there saying, if you want the data behind this, click here type thing. And then we try to find a way to do that. But I'm not sure if it would be useful at this point to have an EPUB version and so on.
Well, I think it does bring up an interesting question about visual meta to begin with, right? Which is like, what do you call a visual meta that starts out as HTML?
Well, visual meta is just saying at the back of the document what it is. So it really doesn't
Right.
matter if it's HTML or PDF, sure.
So the markup should be able to transport to whatever HTML. I mean, we saw some demos from that last year, right? Wouldn't that be a good proof of value?
I really don't know. I think that, you know. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, all right, Mr. Mark, you have your hand up.
No, I mean, I'm not Jamaican. Fred's incredibly right. I mean, I think at the moment we're trying to, rather than saw off the branch we're sitting on, we're trying to build a branch we're sitting on. So lots of bits are in play. So, for instance, at the moment the journal is being assembled in Author, which gives us all the visual meta and stuff. But it wasn't at this point designed and built to do lots of text copy editing, which we now find we need to do. So there are lots of bits and pieces. I think one of the really useful things, and it's been in mind to ask you, and I can do it now we're all here, is what, from the perspective of someone like yourself or Raphael, who's doing community work and journals and newsletters, what sort of linking you want. I totally understand the point that in the here and now, having something that is in the journal also, say, as a post on the FTL website, is useful, because whilst the website may not be here in 10 years' time, it's here now, which is the frame of reference in which many of you, the readers of your newsletter, are going to be working. So it's quite difficult. We're trying to optimize for a number of different things at once. But all I can say is, as a long-term data wrangler, this is incredibly close to home. There's no one size fits all, and we're working towards it. And I'm very open to things, because, for instance, if the journal in the way it's put together works as a journal, but doesn't make a useful enough reference source for more dynamic media, then we need to consider that. Because in the round, what we really want to do, what we want, is for people to consume and see our output. Just to learn.
What?
Kudos is a whole other thing, but just people are reading stuff they don't know, and the world is moving forward. And that's sort of my take on it.
I'm glad you framed it that way, because it does. There's two sides to mention, two observations anyway. When I see the PDF and I take the put on the hat of the user, the feeling I don't want is, hey, we're forcing you to read this as a PDF, right? Because then it's like the danger zone feeling to avoid is, why are these people forcing me into this? Okay. What are they trying to get out of it, right?
Alan, I think that's a discussion we should have kind of specially for the journal. We're trying to do the Monday, Friday once more for kind of what to build and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Conscious Fabian's waiting. I just say to Alan, I'm very happy to talk with you directly on this. I mean, I have some ideas, which probably might bore the pants off everyone, but I think they're really valid things, and I think I definitely think we need to bottom them out.
The second part of that is, it is pretty essential for the seamless or anything other than superficial functioning of a kind of a newsletter or any kind of periodical there, that there could be some sort of handoff. I think it would actually be a really good community effort, and maybe I'll get fired and I'll have time to do this. But like a Obsidian to meta to visual meta.
Yeah, maybe .liquid, but it's an interesting discussion. Sorry, Fabian, you've been waiting a while.
No worries. No, it's I don't know if it's funny, but it's coincidental. I was trying to read this afternoon a document that Brendel shared on Twitter on embodied heuristics, and it's published on Frontiers Psychology, and from a technical standpoint, what they do is they publish online on the web, but they also have the option to download the article in PDF, EPUB, etc. And what was a bit strange or funny is usually it's very rare that I'm going to read a research article on desktop. I usually prefer e-ink to sit down somewhere else, because if I stay behind my computer, then I start to drift because somebody's going to post a tweet or I'm going to check something. But the good thing, of course, is when I'm on the computer, I can copy paste some quote part. I can see if there were some dynamic aspects. I can check some of the sources, etc. And it's what was surprising for me this afternoon is like, I did not know what was the best version of consuming that research paper. Should I sit down on my couch and read it disconnected? Or should I read it online? Because then I can explore a bit more the reference and all that. So there is, I think the way we read basically is changing. It's not just like how we publish the document or how we capture for the journal, but even the very act of reading is different. I don't know if it's better or worse. I tend to prefer anything interactive because I can then get a better grasp of the content, but the content is rarely interactive. It's hard. I don't know if it's hard technically or if people are not used to make their research explorable or tinkerable with. But yeah, that was the kind of question this afternoon that trying to read this article prompted. Anything, yeah, it's kind of related also to both the journal and what we want to build, because in the end, do we want to build the journal? Is the journal just a way to capture, or is it also like a platform for exploration? And if that platform exploration is PDF, is it sufficient?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So exactly, I sent a document to all of you, and I saw your hand, Adam. I'm sure you have further comments. I saw you also took it down. So I sent the document to you guys about the statement of intent for the future text lab. So I need to know two things from you guys, and it's regarding this. One is, who wants to be listed as a volunteer? Who wants to be a part of this? Because I'm not going to put someone's name down if I don't have an email saying that you want to be there. And that's just not fair on you. And also in that document, it talks about building a demo. So the idea is to say that in Future of Text this year, November, December, we will be doing it. And I have suggested that the subject of the demo is going through our record in order to make some sort of a decision, right? So obviously we all need to discuss and do this. So, to discuss what the journal is in technical terms right now, I think is a waste of time, because we have the journal things in a proper format in .liquid, which has all the flexibility. And as anyone wants to do experiments with, I'll give it to you in any format you want for us to build with. But just to have an external facing thing now, it's a little boring. It's an academic format. Yes, if you use Reader or Visual Meta, it's interactive. No, it isn't. I don't think we should spend too much effort on making it interactive now. I think we should rather blow people away when we have used that data in an amazing way later on. Does that address your point, Fabian?
No, because yeah, I get the how do you say, the meaning behind it, but in practice, so for example, I was skimming through and saw the code on one of my exploration, and it's useful in the sense that it shows that it's accessible, and there is a link to it, but it's not color-coded, let's say. There is no syntax highlighting, and I would never read that in that aspect. So there are some things like this that are accessible and we can find a fix, and others that I'm not sure if we can find a fix, because I'm not sure we captured everything in the PDF, and I don't know if it's possible. What I'm trying to say is that how we know we're going to use the PDF is going to change what we're going to try to put in it. And even though some metadata is accessible, not everything is. Maybe it still is if we go through the links and follow through, but I don't think it's automatic that we get all the data straight from it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't make that clear. I am not saying that the PDF should be anything other than currently what the world sees. What we have access to, if you want to post that code, let's say on a web page or in a different format, we will keep that. I am editing the journal in Author because Author is being built more and more to do this kind of stuff. And you can have the native document, we can export. If Adam gives us a special demo, I don't want to have that only frozen in the PDF, for example. If he wants to have it in a GitHub or whatever, it doesn't matter, because if it's given to this community owns it. So when we're then working further with it and we do something amazing in November, we should have access to all of our internal goodies. Does that make sense? The PDF is just a current easy way to keep it 1.1, 1.2, that's it. But all the stuff we keep, all of it, we all have access to, or not. Are you sold, Fabian, or are you still skeptical?
I'm still skeptical, but I'm also still going through all the material, so I don't want to be critical about what I don't know. I'm still exploring. So.
Well, I promised Adam we shouldn't spend too much time in these meetings on the journal, because I think it can go on and on and on. But the pragmatic reason to have the PDF is it is a thing that I started with, and Mark now is helping with a lot, that we basically find stuff and put it out there. Hardly anybody was posting on Circle, which is why I closed down part of it. It's way too expensive for me. Not a single person has really added any, that I can remember, anything to the webpage, rather the blog, which is absolutely fine. But if you want to put something on the blog in a richer format that is referenced from the journal, you absolutely feel free to do that as well. So if you put it this way, you give it to Mark and me in any format you want, we're not going to destroy it and just flatten it as a PDF. It will remain. And hopefully when we do our demo, or when we have the future of text, the PDF will be a nice artifact, but it will not be the main thing. Mark?
Yeah, and just to actually pick up what Fred's saying, I mean, part of the thing is it's just Murphy's law that what Author is in a sense optimized for at the moment isn't necessarily exactly what we want to do at the moment, but that's where we are. So I think the important thing is it makes sense as a central conduit, and yes, it means we're making the PDF with the VM. That doesn't mean it's the only way, and it's very exploratory at the moment. And I'm certainly open to. I mean, I'd like to know things that are hard. For instance, I've already raised the point. It so happens that Author, as it is now, doesn't have code and code coloring and things like that, which I totally understand you might expect in today's web world to see stylized in a particular way. So the answer is maybe something like that will go on the blog, where you can find a more accessible colored up version of it. So we're going to have to roll with some of these limitations at the moment, but they just are what they are. So I think the thing at the moment is, and I'm as prone to anyone as thinking, oh, it doesn't work. I don't like this, but I think we're just having to push through it. We have the tools we have, it's exploratory, and we're also trying to play with a whole other dimension in terms of the VR. So I think the thing is to just try and keep glass half full, but keep reporting the things. I think it is important to capture the things that you find are not good in terms of the reading experience, and we can look at ways around that. And I suspect part of it is to make some of the information available as blog posts on the FTL web blog at the moment, because in turn they can link back to the journal, so we don't lose a link back to the long-term resource. But there is no one-size-fits-all tool at the moment, I think, is really what I've learned from this. And I think that's just part of going on. Reason I have my hand up, and I'm happy to sort of take this later if we haven't got there, is I have some thoughts on Fred's comment, Ray, the demo.
Let's see what Peter has to say, and then
I'll let Peter go first.
Talking about the demo is probably the best next good topic. Yes.
I was wondering, does anyone know if a PDF document can contain JavaScript code that can actually be run from inside the PDF document?
I
I
was
believe
sneezing.
so.
Can
Sorry,
you
Fred.
repeat that, Peter? I was sneezing like crazy.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's possible for us to embed JavaScript code inside of a PDF and have it actually be runnable.
No.
Do you mean in ordinary PDF readers or a special purpose PDF reader? Because you can actually embed any file inside PDFs. You can have PDFs inside PDF if you want to. So if you want source code or any data, you can have videos in there as well. But the question is whether the reader supports them. Of course, our custom reader can do anything we want it to do at some point. But yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking it'd be very nice if we could use an off-the-shelf syntax highlighter and embed that in the PDF, so if the PDF contains source code, it would automatically get processed and pick up all the highlights.
Okay, Peter, no. The reason is that in addition to what Adam says, you can keep putting things in a PDF. However, there are two issues. Issue number one is security. Before Visual Meta was made, one of the ideas was at the end of a document to insert the original source document. Readers would just say, no, this is not secure. No, this is not secure. So I'm sure you could have some JavaScript, but you would just get into security issues a lot. Also, the line wrapping in PDF is absolutely gosh darn awful. So just having working code in there as an idea, yes. As an implementation, awful. Mark, one more or a few more minutes on the current state of the journal, and then we go into the demo. Is that okay, guys? Because otherwise we're kind of polishing a turd, if I may say so about my own work.
So demo. Okay, quick input on that is one of the things that
Sorry, Mark, just want to check. Fabian, do you have a comment on the journal or the demo?
No, it's on the PDF.
Okay, let's finish with that then, please, and then Mark. Sorry, guys.
I think, and a bit was Adam was saying that in the end, with a custom reader, we do whatever we want. But I think the spirit of PDF, the portable document format, was that no matter how good or bad your formatting is, it's going to be the same for anybody who sees it, so that you can refer to, let's say, this quote on that page. And if we make it dynamic, even though it might be more interesting, I think it loses a bit the core idea of PDF. There are a couple of journal, I think Nature Communication maybe, or others that have their specific PDF reader with some augmented PDF, but then it flattens down to a normal PDF if you read it elsewhere. But yeah, just to touch on that.
Yeah, agree. Okay, shall we talk a little bit about the potential demo then that we might work towards? Everybody cool with that? I don't see any shaking hands, so good. Mark, you go.
Okay, so my reflection, I was thinking of this when you understandably mentioned, Joe, or our putative worker, but I'm wondering if the sort of, in a sense, the paradigm shift is the same, that when Doug was demoing, I mean, even if people didn't realize at the time, there was a lot of massively different stuff. Here, I think it's more subtle, and the thing that stuck with me was, kudos, I think, to Brandel, who said, what we really need to do is to learn how to be really wasteful with pixels. So in terms of the demo, I think it's not about whether Joe can sit and do their, a 3D to-do list and find stuff. I think we want to get away from the task so much as just the environment of doing it, and because I think that's the sort of the open part of it, that the tasks that on one level seem the same as were done in the Motherall demos actually are much more quotidian now, and we have sort of good enough tools for them in the digital space, and actually making a couple of different things appear in the same space is nice, but not groundbreaking, not in a way that's going to blow the socks off people, I think. And so I go back to that observation about it. So how do we get to be really insanely wasteful with something that people didn't even know, was a resource. And I just think back, it takes me rather back to sort of, TED talking about using monitors at a time when they were insanely expensive and no one could afford one. So you did everything on a printout. So I don't know. I don't have a more fully formed idea than that. And I don't say it to derail the general concept, but I think that's an aspect of how we frame the demo that's worth keeping in mind. Peter.
Oh, I didn't unmute myself. Okay, I am pasting a link to a paper on design of text editors into the sidebar. I think we might want to take a look at that space. Right now, what's happened is the entire world has decided that VS Code is the paradigm for building tools and components for software development. Now, as I'm building my user interface framework in IMBA, I'm finding it extremely frustrating using the VS Code paradigm because I have all these classes. I want to separate them out into separate files. And the net result in VS Code is that I wind up with 10 million tabs open simultaneously. I have my split. Sometimes I'm split vertically. Sometimes I'm split horizontally. I keep changing views. And it just feels like I have this tremendous amount of wasted time just trying to move between different spaces inside the editor. And I really wish I had something with an author-like spatial map that I could be working on the code project with, but also be able to move seamlessly from that into a traditional code editor, but focus on a single file at a time. Right now, it's just so incredibly messy. There are like two modes that you really want to use. You'll have a side-by-side mode between two files or just focused on one file. And if we could build a tool that's an alternative to the VS Code kind of environment that could work for these kinds of webs of related things, and code's very much a hypertext web. And it's also a multi-dimensional web too, because when you look at symbols that are in a file, they could all be coming from different namespaces, and the namespaces are essentially stacked. So you could almost imagine having a 3D representation of that so that you could get a sense spatially of where the different identifiers are coming from. I'm not quite sure how it would look, but I think that could be worth exploring because, again, right now, all the mind share is being thrown at making VS Code more and more complicated, glomming more and more tools into it, and just workflow-wise and aesthetically, it's a mess, and it winds up introducing a lot of mental confusion. I have so much of my background process, instead of being focused on the code, it's focused on how I'm structuring the editor and interacting with the editor components and pushing things around to see what I care about at any given moment. And there's just so much frustration there. And if we came up with something that was an alternative for our demo, I could see the whole programming world, or at least a significant percentage of it, jumping on board. That would also suggest that we spend a little bit of time re-exploring Noof's ideas about literate programming. Again, it's a great concept, but the tooling just isn't there. No one has ever gotten around to building a good graphical front end for interacting with a literate programming system. You wind up dropping back into pure text and interleaving the language of how you're combining your documentation and your text, the underlying documentation language with LaTeX commands. It's just so messy, and that gets in the way of adoption, even though in practical use, it's a godsend for being able to go back and understand code. And this really seems to be close to our core missions with a text orientation, thinking about code as a class of text that we should care about could also help us attract funding. So those are just sort of my thoughts at the top of the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, Adam?
One interesting thing about the demo is what the quality of the artifact we're aiming for here. We have a spectrum from like presenting lots of chat logs and Twitter things that are quite unrefined and work in progress things with a few gold nuggets in between, but lots of fluff and lots of just ordinary conversation and procedure and so on. So maybe a few percent is really worthwhile reading, and different few percent for different people, of course. But and then we need some sort of highlight reel and yeah, a way of displaying the good things, maybe according to different people, but highlighting things. On the other hand, we have a kind of the a finished book or a mural that is a highly refined knowledge object, which may be, yeah, it could be a lot more interesting to look at, but it's also a bit more unrealistic in that it requires lots of work to produce that artifact. It may not really reflect the mundane everyday life of ordinary people who have lots of meetings, but few people do very highly refined graphical objects. But on the other hand, it's very interesting to do the kind of 3D mural with the guide and many different VR aspects and embodied aspects to it. So it's interesting to. I'm interested in what you think, where we should place ourselves on that scale from, yeah, lots of objects to one very highly refined object.
Okay, I'll take that one first, but please let's reflect. So first of all, just to start up with two defensive points. Number one is, being here with you guys is amazing, but it is like herding cats because we're all volunteers. Like you, Adam, you haven't been here for a couple of weeks. When I text you, I don't know if you're going to be here, and that's totally fine. That is the kind of environment we're working on. But what that then has an impact on is the level of formality of what we choose to enter into our world. So that means that the journal is quite edited in a sense, right? The table of contents should be quite skimmable. You don't have to read every single page. But if you're interested in someone's article, you jump to that. So the idea is that is our community statement of the month. And a lot of it people will skip past, but they shouldn't feel like they're, skipping pages, so to speak. So right now, I think that is the value of the journal. Now, as you guys might have read in the proposal in that document for some kind of a demo, one of the things we have to design is when you open a book or a document or an artifact or whatever we might call it, how does it open? This has been some of the discussion here. Is it literally just this in 3D? That's boring. More likely, it'll open up and there will be, there's a glossary, table of contents, the references can be a library. So then one thing we've discussed on and off in the group for a bit has been the system needs to know what these things are in order to present them properly. So the piece that I sent out today reflects on one issue, which is, should the author editor determine the view when you open this, or should it be the reader? Probably a dialogue, like a lot of, like EPUB and so on. So then you get into the interesting question of, if you have a mural in a document, which I think is really an important idea, essentially an illustration that's designed to be large, when you take that out, where does it go in the room? That's obviously something to discuss, right? So if we talk about what is this VR room, we may very well say that I've said this wall is for murals, this is for pictures, whatever reading system works for me. So when I open this artifact, these things have a place to go. I think that'll be a really huge part of our discussion, because otherwise we're authoring these multimedia objects and every one of them is unique. And if you're opening two objects at the same time, what have you got? Like a Disneyland huge sculpture thing. Probably not as useful as if they know these are timelines, so I can view them together. So that just goes a little bit in that. Sorry, I went off a bit topic as well. Fabienne, please.
A couple of points. First, I mentioned it in the chat, but there is a code mirror, which is an alternative to VS Code. It's a quite good one. I'm going to briefly share my screen to show two examples. This first one is a customization with a different type, and then you can just like numeric type, and then you can use your mouse to scroll around and then change the value. Sounds a bit gimmicky, let's say, but then yeah, with a color you see it more obviously. And also if you explore a set of values, it's very efficient because you don't go like 0.1, 0.111, 0.11111. It's a lot more efficient when you don't know the answer. So it's honestly, it's the little problem I have with this is that it's really then hard to consider a text editor as just a text editor. Like once you consider text and the type of content you have in text as something potentially interactive, then you consider any kind of widgets that are going to support editing. But this is really customizable. And it's not here, it's for code, but it can be for just text, let's say, or whatever type of textual content. And another cool demo with this, not by me, was about editing code also in VR using Code Mirror, so that you can get the benefits of all the different plugins, and including on this plugin, I believe it was a collaborative edition. So there were two people working on this code snippet. One in VR, we can see the screen moving, or the HMD moving, the point of view, and the other one was on just another web-based text page. So yeah, this is if the problem is really, it makes everything so malleable, so everything can be changed. It's hard to think through, but it's very powerful.
Yes, I second Code Mirror. Inside Apple, I wrote a shader editor that is the least worst thing that I've found for writing shaders so far, for the most part. I call it Stradivari because it builds instruments, and the way it works is you wrote, rather than being able to manipulate literals, that's what when you just go like var x equals 2.0, the literal part is the 2.0 because it's an immutable thing, and by default the editors that do things like that are allowing you to manipulate all literals directly. I don't like that as a practice because it means that you have less sort of implicit information about what those values are. So rather I make a system where you declare a variable, but then simply by virtue of declaring it in a certain way, you get a slider or a multi-dimensional box or a color that you then have the ability to manipulate. And that means that you can expose an instrument panel, and that's where the builder of instruments aspect of it comes in. And it's incredibly effective. Despite the fact that I wrote it in 2016, it still remains one of my favorite pieces of code, and it makes me a little bit sheepish because it's like, I think I've gotten better since then, but this is still really useful. So yeah, that's one. But I think it sort of exposes what Fabian is talking about in terms of the breadth of possibility and recognizing the sort of the necessity for constraint of focus in terms of what the semantic meaning of something is. But the second thing that I was going to say was sort of to the point of the references that I cited as superior to the Visual Studio Code. And unfortunately, the thing that the place where I've seen the most innovation, bar none, in sort of imagining things is actually in not Visual Studio Code, but in Visual Studio. Visual Studio Code is an independently created thing that was then acquired by Microsoft. It's a text editor rather than an integrated development environment. But Visual Studio is, so superficially they look the same. But Visual Studio underneath is a much deeper system. I don't like it because I don't want to work in something as involved in that as that. But what it does mean is they have incredibly rich representations of the abstract syntax tree and the dependencies and all of those things. And so what they've successfully done in these two sort of plugins or whatever concepts they have here are the concept of code lens, which is where you can sort of create little mini representations of forward and back in files to see things that call it, as well as things that calling functions and functions that call this, so that you can navigate through that sort of tree, that sort of chain of things. And then there's the sort of the containment stuff of the map dependencies and being able to see a bird's eye view of it. So those are very much things that people use. And yeah, I mean, the supported languages is an issue in terms of what needs to be sort of informed to constitute sort of relationships and linkages. But I've seen phenomenal work with doing things like outputting code traces and being able to consume those into something called Node XL. It's an application that's made by possibly Cambridge University in conjunction with Microsoft, that allows you to do social network graph analysis. And that's where I first learned about, Cornherald, fast multi-scale, and the weird Japanese name one. But what we used it for at one company was to look at hot code paths to be able to kind of imagine that these were actually social graphs, and then to identify the code path through it, meaning that you could see long code loops and you could see exceptionally hot code loops because they would end up being bundled tighter simply by virtue of sort of pushing those through a force repulsion graph. So some pretty interesting things from predominantly Microsoft tools can be done there. So yeah, unfortunately, the NodeXL thing is a Windows only thing, so it's not a lot of help for folks who are on Mac, but it's still very, very interesting.
Thanks, Mark.
A quick thing, just sort of hearing Fred talk about article types. One thing that I probably haven't made explicit, and this being my first sort of loop through doing the journal, but one of the things that's certainly at the front of my mind is exactly this thing, that as well as any sort of supposedly textual hinting as to what an article is, absolutely I have in mind that I wanted to have a deeper representation for exactly the reasons mentioned. So when you unpack this thing, it's got some idea of what it is. And I think that's something towards a demo we definitely want to hold on to. And even if we can't fully implement it, even if we just do it as something as trite as tagging or something, just to make explicit the fact that even if we don't know how to do it, we're aware that there are these sort of representational axes through our sort of journal, our information set, that we certainly would like to be able to draw. And the other thing I just offer, the joy of not knowing how to do things is it's easy to offer, I think, what they call a provocation to people, is to say that, and I'm sorry, I feel my earlier post in the side chat was a bit crisper than I meant, but it's fascinating to see all the stuff going on in the code space. But where I'm really interested is, well, how does that actually map back onto general writing? Because in a sense, that's sort of what we're discussing in the future of text sense. And that's not, I mean, coding is fascinating, complex, extremely skilled, but it's also, I mean, it has the benefit of actually being quite hard-edged, because at the end of the day, you hit a 1 and 0 sort of computer point where you've got to make up your mind whether you're a 1 or a 0. And at the much more human end, we're amazingly fuzzy. So I'm sort of wondering, I'm sitting here thinking, how do we take these really cool ideas? And I've taken some of the links that people have just put up, thinking, okay, so how do we abstract that away from an area that will be really sort of way too abstract for many people to even comprehend, and say, no, we can play these same sort of, we can reuse these same sort of ideas in the way we write text. Now, at one extreme, if I'm just writing, a novel or something, it's always going to have a narrative. It may have streams within it, but it's broadly a fixed thing. But there's a lot of writing in between, and certainly, I definitely think it applies to the world of work. We're actually being able to pull out all these extra patterns could be marvelously powerful.
Yeah.
Witness every long meeting you've sat through and got nothing out of it, although a lot was clearly going on. And so I think we can unlock something.
Yeah, thank you. I think that in terms of talking about potential demo, definitely, I feel the consensus, certainly my feeling, is that it has to be some sort of an augmented environment, VR, AR type thing that we're looking at. So I think we need to have discussions further on what happens on the page, as you just talked about, Mark, and also that Peter was talking about. But if we go a little bit back to the in and out of the virtual environment, it kind of boggles my mind to find how complicated it gets every little step we try to go into that. But I was going to ask Brandel, is there any chance you could do a quick review of what you showed a few weeks ago of how you took the map from the .liquid file into VR? Because I think it shows one opportunity where, for instance, with our own journal, whoever is working on this, you just get the liquid version of it. All the data's in there. Do you mind doing a quick screen share? Do you have it available?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Let me just set that up. Make sure there's nothing fancy. And
so while Brenda is getting ready, just a really quick thing. On a Mac, as most of you know, it's a wrapper. Inside the wrapper, there are JSON files. You open that, the data is really easily accessible. So we're now looking at how to get these things into the Oculus headsets. So you can do stuff on your computer, and then the metadata is instantly available, or not instantly, but easily available in your headset. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, this will do. I'll share screen.
We're saying reflections on your glasses just to tease us.
Okay, I'll share everything. Devil may care. Okay, so this is the author document that I have. Super useful, valuable information about Stanislas Dehaene, who's a cool guy. This is I was primarily looking at consuming this context stuff here in the map view. And you have the ability to click on these words. I've aligned them, I've arranged them in space. You can see there's a gray line here because the definition for toy makes use of the word type and makes use of the word text. And Dealey Bopper is a toy. You can see that in here. It's a toy. So all of these things are sort of in this structure. This has a definition, but it doesn't reference these other things. And this guy doesn't have a definition. But so that's saved in this file more MLAR. And if I go to Finder here, I can drag that into this author parse page. Now, if I hover over these, so you can see that those this map is in the same space, same shape as it is an author. And if I hover over them, oh, this one's dead. So for some reason, the alignment of it, maybe if I do, no, how about, oh, okay, so it's sort of luck of the draw for some reason. I haven't worked out what it is that this doesn't like, that results in the
Does it have to do with the VR not supported at the bottom?
No, that's just because I'm on a Mac that doesn't have the ability to jump into VR. So I've actually tried to speak with the folks on 3JS about the fact that that's an unhelpful phrase, because it makes it seem like VR isn't a thing, whereas what it really means is that the device that you're on doesn't support VR. And so my preference would be something like, well, one, not all caps, because I think that's a bit hostile, and two, to have potentially a link to some information card. But yeah, one of the major contributors to 3JS sort of rebuffed that and said, no, that's a problem on your end. You need to write a thing rather than changing defaults, which I think is a useful thing. Anyway, so what's happened here is that I've rebuilt those dependency relationships. So you can see that there's that gray line again from Dealey Bopper to toy. And the toy is a type of cool thing. The type, oh, I haven't put proper text wrapping into this, but yeah, it's not text there, it's text there. But yeah, so this means that you'd have the ability to load this into a WebGL context, which would then have the ability, you can also see, what is it? Yeah, too much bro doesn't have a definition, so it doesn't hover. But yeah, so go ahead.
I have a question for just a technical question later on. I don't want to interrupt them.
Sure.
Actually, Brendel, can I just highlight something?
Yeah.
This is particularly for Alan and Peter. The VR not supported. If you're watching this on your Oculus using the Oculus browser, what that would say is enter VR, something like that, right, Brendel? What's the exact
Yes.
word?
Yeah, it's possibly open in VR.
Yeah, that's it. So that means that you would then only see that environment in 360 around you. So this is a really simple way, and it's simple for the user, not for what Brendel has done, to take data from the .liquid file, and then you could potentially go into a VR environment, move these things around, save it back to the liquid file with the third dimension being added. And then you have that as you keep working on it. So
Perfect. Brilliant. Yeah. Love it. Want it. Awesome.
Yeah. So the next step for me, and I got somewhere along the way this week, but I haven't finished it to success yet, is having, in the same way that I had that sort of multi-user environment where you could see each other's screens, see each other's positions in space, including virtual reality, so you could have multiple people waggle their fingers at each other. The aim for me here is that because it's not particularly easy to drop an author file onto a Quest, onto a VR headset, because for the most part they are standalone. Have it so that you can have two people logged into the same website, and I on a Mac can drop this into here, and then that would populate that over the network to the other participants in the page, such that if there was somebody in a Quest doing the same thing, that they would have it appear on their side, meaning that you have a relatively amenable way of jumping into an author file, rather than having to sort of drag it onto there. The next step would also be, and this is something that can happen completely independent of the VR work, is jumping in and figuring out whether or how it is possible to create to write back to a file. Because while in macOS it appears as though it's a single file, if you click show package contents, you can see that there's a fairly large list of content in here. There's a .liquid store, which is a binary P list. It's something that is specific to Xcode, so it's probably a relatively parsable format, but not something that I've looked at. But the thing that I've been sort of reaching into is this dynamic view. This is the JSON of the node list. It's got these unique identifiers, universally unique identifiers. And then it's got the positions and things like that. So to the extent that author itself can be augmented with additional information about, for example, three-dimensional positions. So it's got these two-dimensional positions. As far as I can gather, author doesn't currently support panning and zooming. So that means that the coordinate space is constrained to the specific thing. Obviously, it's pretty tricky to have a sort of a cardinal coordinate space rather than something that has to have, well, sort of like an authoritative bounding frame within 3D. And so you typically need to be able to kind of zoom and move around. And so by default, what I do in this is to do the appropriate bounds checking to be able to dynamically set those things. And that would probably be a valuable thing there. But yeah, so there are other files in here. There's a glossary, which I also parse for those definitional things. There are comments, left margin, dynamic view, endnotes. And then there's also this RTFD file, which itself is actually another directory that contains an RTF file, which is the main corpus of that text. I haven't nothing jumps out at me as something to do with that text content, so I haven't played with it too much. But yeah, happy to at such time as we kind of figure out what we want from it. But the end result of it is that, yeah, that makes it pretty straightforward. I'm not going to say trivial, but possible to be able to kind of obtain the contents of documents like this and be able to kind of work with it. And then, yeah, so the next thing would be to make a web page that is able to write back to an author file, to a liquid file. And I'm not sure if there are specific checksums and things. I haven't manipulated the contents of it to see whether that breaks things. But I mean, we could do that pretty easily if you open up Visual Studio Code, and then if we change the contents of one of these things, like the dynamic view here, and say that Dealy Bopper is not a fun toy. Then if we try to open that here instead, yeah, okay, so it's pretty straightforward. There are no particular checksums, but at least in that respect. Although, because then this doesn't have a definition because it's changed its name. And it may have been properly reflected if we do that. So if we then go into, that means that there's a dangling definition, but if we go into this guy instead.
Randall, on that point, what's in the map and what has a definition have nothing to do with each other. It's purely that it happens to be the same, that a definition appears.
Yes, yeah, no, that makes sense. And so, yeah, so that the thing, the phrase that has a definition there, yeah. So now if I reopen this file and I go here to fun toy. Oh, did I do it in the same file? Oh, maybe I did it in this one here. Anyway, yeah, so if we jump into this guy here, and we go into the definition, the glossary file here, and change Dealy Bopper back to fun toy. And we go to here. Then we should retain that definitional link.
Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, so to that end, it should be pretty straightforward to be able to manipulate these author files in systems outside of author in order to be able to show those sort of benefits. Yeah.
Quick question.
Hang on, before the question, just a few additional things. Please don't forget your question. First of all, I didn't invent this format. Jacob did, who wrote author. He just made a very clever dispersion of different things in different files. So my contribution here is to find it. It's like, wow, that's easy. So you saw how easy it is to show package content. It's completely open and using system standards. This is not a commercial thing for us. This is just an open thing. Secondly, the paper that I sent you guys today started with Zettelkasten and all kinds of stuff, and it's all very interesting. But as I go through the whole thinking with cards, it gets messy again. So I've gone back to thinking with glossary terms or defined terms. So at some point, I'd like to have a battle with the different perspectives of what are the objects we should have and hold in a virtual space that are most useful for different people in the community to think with, and how can they be related to things. And the final thing before I hand over to Adam is, while reading up again on Zettelkasten, again, going back, I know that Carl Linnaeus, of course, Swedish, though he may have been, when he was thinking on index cards, these index cards are actually stored in London at the Linnaean Society. So I have an appointment to go there and view these cards on Tuesday. You will all be there in spirit. I'm having one of the curators show it, so it's just going to be amazing. So that was it. Brandel, thanks a billion. Adam?
If anyone has something specific to this, mine was more general about the demo.
Yeah, I got something quick and specific. It's just kind of for my own edification, I guess. So I love everything you got there, Brendel. It's pretty stunning to see. From a naive user perspective, one of the things that I personally like, but what I understand about WebGL is that this may actually be like really difficult, is you see the map that you just made in author, and then as you pull it around, the letters actually stay sort of static or front facing. Mm-hmm. But what you can do is drag them now in a three-dimensional space, right? So you could say, so now you're working in a three-dimensional conceptual space of like, I know concept is a more abstract term, so I'm going to push it to the back and I'm going to make particulars up in the front. Does it work against the grain of WebGL to keep the objects sort of like not stuck in space, but stuck in
billboarded
perspective?
That's called billboarding. No, that's
billboarding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's a pretty standard kind of thing to do. I mean, one question in 3D, in stereo, is what are you billboarding against? Because for the most part, you get by default you get the left eye. So one of the things that I've discovered in some let's see, it's called XR Clip. It's a clip. Yeah. So one of the things that I've experienced as a problem with that is that you have this is a mirror. You can kind of see that if we look through the mirror, we can see that there are boxes through it, and you can move the mirror and you can't see things except through it. This actually works in virtual reality as well. If you go to this page, click on that and you can see. But right now it's aligned to be clipped through the left eye rather than the right, which is which means that the boxes sort of overflow a little bit out of this magic mirror.
It's still a
but yeah.
little different than what I'm talking about, I think. I could
Oh yeah,
be
no, no.
wrong.
What you're talking about is billboarding, and billboarding is straightforward. What I'm saying is that that billboarding needs to be relative to a specific point, and so the question is it your left eye? Is it your right eye? Is it the place between? Because if it's your left eye, then it's not billboarded to your right eye, and that doesn't matter too much at the distance, where the stereo parallax between the two images is minimal. But once it gets close, then it's quite weird. But if it's between your eyes, then it's actually not billboarded to either, and so you end up with weird stuff. I mean, it's the same as looking at a letter up like this, which we mostly don't do in serious work. But
oh, okay, okay, thank you. Great. All
Any
right.
other questions or comments on this before we move on to Adam?
Yeah, I'll briefly share my screen. The idea is to go potentially before Brendel's demo, in the sense that you need to get your liquid file somehow on the device, and that's been challenging. So I guess some of you remember the Jurassic Park 3D file explorer thing, which in most cases is a little bit silly. It's like, okay, but what for? We don't need a file system in 3D. And that's true until you're stuck in a VR headset. And then somehow, in some specific context, it might make sense. So I'm going to share this. So that's my online file system. It's using Nextcloud. It doesn't really matter, but what's interesting is it's compatible with WebDAV. So you can basically mount the file system however you want, write back to it from the command line, or for native tools. And also what I did was a browser extension, but could be also web-based entirely. I'm going to try to zoom it a bit more. And it's not extremely visually explicit, but the blocks are directories and the white cubes are files. So and they match. Let's say you see the directory on the left, and then the visual content in 3D, but in VR, same on the right. And then what I believe could be interesting is that instead of just displaying the content symbolically as a red cube or a yellow one on the left or right one, is then you switch to a viewer, and that viewer, for example, could be a link to a Brendel's liquid file. So instead here you would see the liquid file, and then you open it on the other web page.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it reminds me that I use an application like that, not necessarily every day, not a 3D one either, it's a 2D one, but it's called Daisy Disk. If people haven't used that for looking at their disk allocation on Mac OS, it's phenomenal. And really, really interesting. So having the ability to actually construct a space and for that space to be flexible is really interesting. And in Windows, there's an equivalent uglier thing that makes use of a tree map view. And tree map views are, again, if you're not familiar, very, very interesting representations of boxes that are kind of split into essentially adaptive quad trees, where the size of some feature is proportionate to some whatever attribute under analysis. So in large part, that's often population or file size and things like that. And it's one of the more easy to reach visualizations within D3. And so I've used it inside Apple as analytics for which specific user agents are hitting apple.com in order to be able to see the weird, funny fringe PlayStation browsers and things like that. I don't think it's giving up the trade secrets to say that we don't expect a majority of our traffic from PlayStation.
Very cool. Okay, over to you, Adam.
So back to the demo part, and I read the proposal, and I really liked several things about the proposal. I like that you concentrated on a workflow, because and it ties back to what Mark said about code editors. Programs have a bit more of a workflow support with the code. different versions and releases and branches, and we really need. I think we really need that for text, a visualized version of it, so you can see what version you're actually working on, and also recognizing that that many texts have a distinct phases, from brainstorming to first draft to public, to sending it to first few friends, and then it gets a bit more formal, and then you go to different proofreading phases or detail phases and so on. So having that workflow where and how different people combine their drafts into something that is a bit more maybe linear, but it could be an artifact that is a 3D artifact, but a bit more polished, but where you don't change the overall structure and so on. So I like that workflow part. I really like the focus on collaboration also, because it really can bring in, like the things Brandel have shown, like real-time floating hands and people in the same room actually discussing the artifacts. I also like the idea of working with conceptual units, giving up the pages and back to the more chunks and conceptual units. And I also like working directly with data, source data. Like I rather work with liquid files. I'm not really sure if liquid. That's a discussion. That's a technical discussion if that's where we're going. But I really like working with having basically the manuscript format and the publishing format being as close as possible. So you can pull out images in full quality, that the text and data stay intact or as good as possible. So that was a few. I also have a question, and that is what the overall goal of the demo is. Is it a goal for the user? Not for the demo, but for the user. Is it the production of an artifact, or is it and would that artifact be the 3D mural you mentioned, or is it the 3D mural kind of a support for the production of an artifact? That was not really clear from the document. And also I think we should really highlight what the benefits of a traditional workflows would be, because it will be on everyone's mind. I already do this in some way, whether it's Google Docs or a file folder. So we really need to show what this brings to the table working in AR and VR. Yep, over.
Thank you. To address some of those issues, first of all, Peter and Alan, you have to get headsets. It's like,
I have one.
Use it. Anyway.
I have one right there.
Wonderful. Use it, because it is so. It's so difficult to explain the difference because it's not 3D. It is anyway. On the manuscript issue, that is a really, really difficult issue, I think, and something we should properly think about again and again, because something that is published has a different role than something that is a manuscript. It's not the same thing. Google Docs makes this hell by making things public that aren't really public, and you don't have version, you don't have a final thing, all of that stuff. My current thinking is that we release, at least in my world, we release a PDF with visual meta. It'll do some, but then it has a reference to, here's the original .liquid document, which is being hosted at this location for as long as that's available, so that viewing systems can access either or both or whatever. And if, as you know, .liquid is an accidental discovery, I assume we will go much further with what we put in there. But the idea is that we put as much raw data as we can there, make it available when it's available, and we'll see how that goes. When it comes to the goal of Joe's work, what I'm finding when I'm going around this in my mind again and again is, first of all, it is really hard to demonstrate the difference between 3D on a flat screen and being in a VR headset. But one of the things is authorship. We had this thing we called multimedia in the 80s, trying to be a bit facetious here. The problem with multimedia is that if you're going to do good multimedia, you have to be an excellent photographer, 3D modeler, audio designer, Photoshop expert, illustrator, etc. Some people are, most people aren't. I think that when we are looking at how to view rich information in VR, we will get not the same, but similar, that people will decide that my main document is here, table of contents maybe here, that's quite traditional. I want to have the references as a library over there. Actually, no, I want to design your own space for a document will become a really big thing. And I can imagine Fabienne and Brandel just rolling their eyes at this because it's obvious because they've been in there for so long. But to try to actually present that is really hard. And as I said earlier, and then suddenly you have two documents and they're competing for your attention. So that's why we need to have as much smarts as possible. That's why I like what Jacob did with the .liquid format. Each type of metadata is actually its own file. So it can be manipulated and read independently. And we can probably go further than that. So when it comes to answering your question, Adam, what I think this character Joe should do is at the end of it, have gone through what we've learned over the year and make a really beautifully presented package that someone can open. But it's in a way that if they have their own timeline or if they have their own map or their own whatever, it will work with that because it's known that that is what it is. Because I can imagine a basic problem is, let's say we have a map. I mean, like right now, you and I, Adam, we're sitting in, well, a lot of us here, we're in Europe. There's a war on, it's absolutely crazy. One of the things I want to know, because I have friends and family there, friends with family in Ukraine, is what's happening. I could imagine, obviously, in augmented reality, we could have an incredible map. But, how do we actually get the metadata to fit that map? Even now on Google Maps and other maps, it's actually hard to do for the average user. But let's say you have it. Is that going to be floating in space? Or will it know that, there's a map and here's another map, I will go here? Similarly to if you open up a reference section from one document, then you open up another one. Should they just be two graphics in space, or should they have knowledge that we are both selections of documents? So the user can then say, put them together or tear them apart or whatever. So the production of knowledge objects in rich environments will be so difficult, and it'll be also really difficult for the reader to have a comfortable space. One thing I hated when I first got into this thing way back in the 80s, well, more like the 90s, was the information ghettos of CD-ROMs. CD-ROM, it's all beautiful, you have the thing, but it doesn't relate to anything else in the world. I'm concerned that metaverse, VR, AR will often have the same thing. You go in a room and you can play lightsaber, or you have a molecule you can interact with, or you have a map or whatever. I think we need to work to make sure that all of these knowledge objects can go about. So the authoring and reading will be a thing, big thing. Yeah, sorry. Does that at all reply to your question, Adam? Okay, Mark, please.
Sorry, I've got a sort of grab bag of small things. In no particular order, but in the order I sort of thought of them. One is watching Brandel working with the liquid map, and I was thinking my early experiments of trying to put stuff in Noda. One interesting thing is that I can envisage a 3D layer. I can envisage sort of where I want things to be in relation to other things, whether in 2D or, well, most likely in 2D to start with, but perhaps even 3D. Interestingly, the app that I'm working with doesn't seem to think in those terms. So it's like, I don't know where 000 is in relation to my start point. I don't know any of the orientations. I don't know the actual scale. I mean, if I know the scale, I can work out the number I want to put in. So in other words, if I'm planning to put stuff into an environment, so that's been a really interesting eye-opener to me, and I'm open to ideas as to how to sort of better think about that, because I have no grounding in this area. RTFD, I noticed we whiz past, and for what it's worth, and just in case that's a bind, is my understanding is RTFD is a Mac-only format. It's basically RTF with images in base64 encoding in it. So I can see that, for instance, in terms of author, so that's where the images are living. They're living base64 encoded, which is, of course, actually not particularly compressive inside the RTF stream. I just mentioned that better or worse because in case people didn't know that, it might be useful. And another thing that sprung to mind as Fred was talking about this thing, I take stuff in there, I've got these things, is taking another nibble at something we discussed earlier. So one of the things perhaps we need to start identifying is a sort of a list of primitives of sort of types of things that might emerge in our thing, and it's going to be a bit of finger in the wind to start with, but even if it's an incomplete set, it's probably worthwhile using that, even if only to use it for constraints of to look at why that list is insufficiently clear for sake of argument. Because I think, I mean, in that sense, I always find constraints rather useful as a starting place, because let's try and at least color inside the lines, and if the lines are too restraining, well, okay, now I've got a good reason to go and move them. Sometimes if the whole thing's open, I don't have a mind big enough to be able to encompass all that at once. And yeah, I think that's what I had. Okay, over to the next then. Okay, bye.
I would like to suggest maybe formalizing that, because I know where I wind up gravitating is towards those problems and how we're thinking about these tools that we use. And I think it's important to explore that perhaps as a separate branch from the new interfaces, because I think if you get to a place of solving some problems, the new interface, you'll find, just like with Web3, that, oh, now those older problems have come back in and are actually preventing any progress, right? And so I think that there still needs to be attention paid to polysemious meaning, those weird problems of language. And I'd love to share at some point what I've been working on that front. In some cases, Brindle, I think you'll dig it, because I've started calling at least the part of TFTs that I'm most interested in inactive interfaces, meaning the back and forth of the tool and the mind and the hand to lead to cognition. And I think that it pertains to VR just as much as these, but using that as a frame to say, to dive into those murkier issues of how we have to use words today, and how, to Peter's point, we're getting procrusted into a developer's mindset oftentimes with when we're trying to do more with our ideas and words, because we don't have a cohesive argument or conversation around what's the alternative.
Totally. In terms of that sort of inactive stuff, I think that's a really important part for me. Is what are the ways in which the specific interaction with media can directly contribute to learning? And to that end, did everybody see the thing I said about a baseball player? Has everybody heard how baseball players and cricket players catch fly balls? I'll put it here because it's awesome. So a lot of people have sort of made fairly bombastic and wild claims that while it doesn't seem like it, it's as though baseball players are solving a series of complex equations in order to be able to figure out where to run to in order to catch a ball. But experimental research and just a bit of soul searching yields that's not the way they do it. What happens is that baseball players and other players of ball sports will see a thing up in the air and they'll run toward it, and they will slow down and speed up to match their speed to make sure that it is perceptually constant in the air, so that it's neither rising or falling. If they run too fast, it'll rise. If they run too slowly, it'll fall. But by matching their speed to the rate at which it's dropping, they get the ability to make sure that they arrive just at it in time to be able to catch it at arm's reach. The reason why we know that is because if they were doing the complex simultaneous equations, they would run to the spot and then they would wait there. And they don't do that. And you can screw them up by changing the apparent position of a ball or whatever in order to do that. So experimentally, it can be derived that this is a much more apt theory for it. The reason why it matters for inactive kind of processing is that, and it's also the way almost all predators catch their prey as well, in terms of those perceptual consistencies of angle. The reason why that's important is because it really provides a clue as to what are the kinds of things that we're exceptional at being able to develop as sort of motor cognitive skills. And the reason why that's different is because it's explicitly motor cognitive. It's where you're integrating some intrusion onto a system by way of moving your head or moving your hands or manipulating things in multiple dimensions in order to be able to kind of come up with something. And that's, you know, where the idea of the folding games, the protein folding games, what fun as they aren't, were interesting is that people are better at protein folding and imagining things and being able to see the sort of the approximate pose distance of a folded protein than the best supercomputers. And so it's actually worth getting human beings, to the extent that they can be bothered, taking a punt on those kinds of problems.
There's a fantastic book as well on that point, going back to the baseball player, and essentially around the argument for heuristics, but a slight redefinition of it. I'm trying to think. I've got it. I'm almost there. The fellow who's significant for almost breaking down some of the ideas of behavioral economics and all of that algorithmic thinking. I'll put it in the channel once I find it.
Yep.
You've probably heard of him.
Yeah, the person I just discovered this week was Gerd Gigerenzer at the Max Planck Institute, and it just fabulous work. Really, really interesting.
Yes. And what's the name of his book?
I'm not sure of the specific book in which it's covered. I just read a paper that he published last year or so, that people were sort of passing around on Twitter.
Maybe I have the physical.
Oh, but another thing that I wanted to say about something that Gigerenzer says, and he actually said it in a talk in 2015 or so, that I think is really important, and it's a little tough because it's what I tend to promote generally as well, is really look at experts, watch what it is they're actually doing, and talk to them about what the specific praxis that they undertake is, and then try to build things that are supportive. I mean, he doesn't say this, but try to build things that are supportive of that. He says copy them, but I say build things that make it easier to copy them. And so if there's a specific mental model for example, historians having some kind of shadow timeline that they're able to overlay, then make something that does that. If people have manipulations that they make inside their head, either simulated or real, then build supportive tools to that end. And so to that end, one of the places where I would submit it would be a useful sort of component of a demo is to read through, and I admit I haven't read it. My wife has, though. She read it for me, but I will read it as well. Is Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren, How to Read a Book. And one of the things that they say is use the index page a lot. And so to that end, having books that or having representations of information that are amenable to being able to refer to the index and being able to refer to the table of contents is, while fairly mundane, an absolutely essential component of being able to say, this is what more guided reading is. I'm tempted to continue my experiment of vivisecting books in order to be able to have more of those components available to me so that I can look at both the TOC, the body, and the index at the same time without having to kind of flip through hurriedly between them all.
That's another interesting point, just to touch on, which I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things I don't like about tools for thought as a term is that, for my purposes anyway, it's a great term, but it can imply tools as well as methodologies, processes, and et cetera, right? So How to Read a Book teaches you a tool for thought, right? Going back to the index, and that's awesome for that. But it waters down the territory when you actually want to focus on, inactive design affordances and heuristics, But that's that also needs I'm sure it has a term, but yeah, a good trick. Okay.
Over to Fabienne.
In terms of what to build, I would argue for something that does give an artifact at the end, because otherwise, indeed, we go back to processes, which are still inarguably processes supported by a tool is the most important. Okay, we have concepts behind it that help to build the tool and that enable a new process. But in the end, I think a lot of people are going to ask what for. like it's not a philosophical discussion, but you get some benefits from it. And usually people see benefits as a thing, like some physical good or digital good or something like this. So I would argue personally for an artifact still produced by a tool that underlies a process that has some concepts behind it. But otherwise, I'm a little bit worried that yeah, it's going to be too philosophical. It's a little bit tricky though. It comes with an asterisk that once you produce an artifact, then people are going to say, oh, but I already produce a PDF using Inkscape. Why would I change my way to do things? So it has to be very clear how the artifact produced is either impossible to do otherwise or significantly harder.
I completely agree with that. And with the notion of CD-ROMs being information ghettos, and that being very likely it'll happen in the metaverse when the big companies make stuff. I think producing a nice demonstration will be one thing, but having the flexibility to change it, I think that will be something that people will say, oh, okay, that I can't easily do. Like when you have multiple documents in a room or even something as simple as you open a document that has been made with this in mind. One of the images is dedicated as a mural. So when you open it up, you can flick that into your mural space. You know, it's not that slow thing of scaling it, fitting it on a thing or whatever, right? So that there's a few things that, okay, so what I wrote in this previous document was that if we're going to upgrade how we interact, we also have to upgrade our information. So if the information bits in our environment know what they are, more interesting things can happen. So at the end of this demo, hopefully we won't have a pre-recorded demo. It will be, okay, you've seen 5 minutes of wow. Now, audience, what should we do with it? You know, we're giving them some context, but it was like, oh, okay, on the timeline, I want to see temperature or whatever it might be. Maybe we have a few plants in the audience, right, for a few things that are possible. It was like, oh, you want to see that? Okay, this is the method where I search for that information, find that information, and once I have that information, it has a space to go to.
It's great seeing everybody. I
So-
got to jump a little earlier than I thought. Fro,
am
can we talk?
Alan, I'm supposed to see you. Am I seeing you later today?
Yeah, I was supposed to be at well, right now I have to go. I think it was going to be around now, but my travel itinerary has been blown out of the water, so I actually have more of a weekend
Okay,
than I thought, which is great.
good. Well, ping me later. I have a little thing to do at the end of this also, but yeah, we'll keep.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay.
I have a quick reflection on what Fred was saying, and apologies, I'm behind the curve and it's occurred to everyone. But when you were just saying, well, everything needs to have a place to go to, I found myself thinking, gosh, well, this is so different to the concept when people were talking about sort of 3D file systems, where you'd see something which was a sort of an imagined stack, effectively, you know, lots of things stacked somehow neatly in 3D. And of course, that's quite different to, in a sense, what you're saying. So you construct a document, you provide it with information such that it knows that when it's in this more expressive state environment, certain things are used in certain ways. And it's not so much where they go. It's not that that's at XY position, that because it's on, you know, row 4, stack 16, as sort of the old and sort of, you know, wireframe sci-fi movie filing system would show you. But it's rather, okay, no, this needs to be in a frame that's set at a distance such that I can see a large amount. You know, it's a different thinking underneath it. It's not where how do I pack all the things, you know, most conveniently and most compactly onto the screen, but rather no, you know, this thing needs to be big, this thing needs to be close, and that's an interesting thing I take from your observation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really grateful for this discussion. I think we're making some progress. And once we can have some real data with what both Fabian and Brandel have been working on and extending that, then we can take real stuff in. I really, really think real makes such a difference. So yeah, I think we're going somewhere. Adam, you asked a lot of questions that became articles on having text around you in a circle and all these things. I think that is really, really crucial. And I think it brings in the artistic angle that is absolutely necessary. So, but in able to do that, we need to, yeah, real data. Sorry, I'm just so stuck on that. But because also it's not just us. When we invite other people in to have a look at it, you know how when you walk into someone's house who's just done a renovation, yes, you may focus on the lights and the wall color and all that stuff. But if you're there as a guest or to work, you know, you look at things in a very different way. And, you know, hopefully we can start doing that kind of testing soon. But also in the defense on the whole liquid thing. So Fabienne, you don't use a Mac, right? So you should still be able to use it. You know, because it's just JSON files and stuff inside. So we have to figure out a way where you can author to it and it's useful. And also the files that you don't need are not destroyed. Jacob has been really, really busy on other projects, but when he comes back in, I'm very happy to talk to him about removing the need to use our software only, because it's not really fair that you can only access, you know, the glossary or something.
So technically, I'm not worried based on the explanation that you shared last times. So, but it's true that on a more, let's say, philosophical standpoint, even though the format is open, if I start to invest time in a format that I don't have a native reader on my platform, it doesn't, it's a little bit scary, let's say. So that's just a bit the more, let's say, pragmatic perspective, and I sorry to Brendel there, but I don't want a Mac because I don't want to get my finger in the locked-in system. So I have one device, but I cannot have two, otherwise I get, let's say, trapped in it. So I understand, let's say, the different appeals to it, but yeah, there is it's a bit silly, but there are things like this that I won't budge from. So I'm not don't spend time on explaining the format. I'm really confident I can parse through it. Having a bridge, that's also why I mentioned a web-based reader last time, is because we have the competence here to play with web tools, and also because it makes the result, either the reader or the author or both, to be cross-platform by default. That was also one of the reason I mentioned it last time.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think we may agree on at this point, the difference between traditional Flatland and VR is best for relationships and Flatland for reading text. Because, you know, and let's build for that now. So if you can't necessarily read or write in VR, of course we want to get there. You know, no discussion there, but at least now being able to have a lot of different things up and see the relationship, that is the real value it brings. Right, so yeah.
I have to run away, but thanks again for today. So.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're here, but also please consider, if you want to be in the official thing of this, you need to tell me, and then you know, how you want to be listed, if at all.
Will do.
All right, see you later, Fabian.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Same question goes for you guys, but not you, Mark. You're already in because you're co-editor of the journal.
I have a well, not a question, but a couple of observations that might be pertinent to actually Fran and Brenda, because I've been sort of getting back on the horse with the sort of 3D, which was doing this Noda thing, but and I will write this up for the journal. It is partly I need to calm down a bit before I write it, because having been in the startup, I know I'm about to. I'd otherwise write very unkind things about a position I've been in myself. You know, you can't do everything at once. But in addition to the points I made about sort of 3D spatial things, I mean, one really interesting thing is just how hard things like 2FA becomes. I spent my entire time, I go into something that said, now log into this system, and then my phone, which is the other end of the room, would go bing, stumbling over chairs, trying to read it through pass-through, which doesn't quite do. So there are some really interesting practical aspects about that on one level are issues of implementation, but slightly non-trivial, because if you've got something glommed to the front of your head, and that's probably where we'll be for a few years yet, it does impose certain impediments. And I'm sure people will say, oh, well, if you only live inside my walled garden, all these problems will go away. And, well, we've all been there before. So yes, I thought that was an interesting thing I sort of took from it. The other thing I was surprised by was that actually, I mean, I have a slight shake, and it's probably got worse with age, but I mean, I don't have very unsteady hands, but I actually found doing this very hit and miss, which this seems to be the default press thing at the moment.
Too. Yeah.
And not critique. I mean, I this is just trying to be, as someone new to use of this compared to someone others in the room, my first impression, such that I found I had better fidelity with the trackers, except that probably because I haven't played Twitch games and things, I find it hard to press this without pressing that at the same time.
Mark, can you please put this in an article? This is really
as I say, I need to reflect on it, because if I write it down now, it'll be angry and ranty.
It's perfectly relevant.
Later. It's really important, this raw stuff.
Yeah, but I don't want to be unkind to people in doing so.
No, I'm perfectly fine with people being unkind to the medium. That's what it really requires in order for people not to sort of gloss over the issues as they're encountered and discount them for the immense importance that they have to the viability of sort of expressions of thought through it. So not by way of an excuse, but as an explanation. The tracking fidelity of the tracker, the device, controllers, is fundamentally different and an order of magnitude greater than the capacity with the hands. You can't do hands and track and controllers simultaneously, because they change the refresh rate for the processing, and the processing is made very substantially based on a very heavy-handed machine learning model that I've done looking at hands. And so one thing that I've observed, actually, somebody who was ex-Oculus that I've worked with, is missing a knuckle. And that is enough to throw the system off, so that it doesn't recognize his hand as a hand a lot of the time. Very, very problematic. So anybody building stuff for this kind of thing absolutely needs to have a reasonable kind of corpus of information that they can use to be able to look across a wide range of people. The other thing about it is that it's a possibility that the illumination in the environment will have an impact. And so if you have natural light, or if you have lights that are flickering at a rate that impedes the refresh rate at which it's happening, using things like fluorescence rather than incandescence in a room, will mean that you have a higher likelihood of flicker overlap between the things. It's a possibility that because it was made in America rather than Europe or the UK, that the flicker rates may be actually interfering with one another. Then those are all problems that can be mitigated, but they are problems that need to be addressed by the hardware folks and the ecosystem folks in order to make them work better. But I absolutely agree. I hate the pinch.
That's not very accurate.
Well, and the people at HoloLens used to call it the boop, for like booping a snoot, and I think it's just a really unsatisfying interaction, and it also depends on where it is. If it's a little bit lower down, then that can feel better, but it needs to be here, and depending on, because the cameras are only face mounted, then it depends on the sort of angle of attack, essentially, where your hand is, and whether it's your headset has a good view of it. Again, I think that's the sort of thing that could go away with more ambient kind of monitoring of a space, where you have the ability to say, there's a camera up in the corner of the room, you guys work it out, so that's not something that anybody has sort of line of sight to to providing a solution on the basis of, but it's something that I would anticipate should be part of somebody's solution to all of those problems.
Brendan, did you work on the Apple website for the new products that were released on Tuesday?
I actually didn't. I mean, I had a look at it. I was able to sort of poke my nose around and see things and have a quiet word to some people, but not as much as I would have liked in terms of the behavior and performance of some of the pages. But yeah, no, I'm excited to have those devices out, and for people to think about again, how can we be wasteful with pixels now that a Mac Studio can drive 90 million of them? Is a sort of a provocation that I've been putting to a number of people inside Apple recently.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had the very strange reaction, having always been got to have the latest, greatest Mac stuff for many, many decades, of watching it saying, yeah, I wouldn't mind that monitor or that computer, but it feels like they're developing a new diesel engine, and I'm driving a Tesla. So, when you think about VR, having a slightly bigger thing that's a bit faster just misses the point. So you've really put some shit in our Kool-Aid here, Brenda.
Well, so I feel much more bullish about the Mac Studio display because it's got a 12 megapixel camera attached to it and to every single one.
Yeah,
and it's got an A13 processor in it. So I'm not saying that anybody has designs for what that processor would be capable of doing, of processing, but I certainly would. So one of the things that you will notice in Oculus Quest is this concept of fixed foveated rendering, where the center of your view is anti-alias to a high degree, so it looks really good. But the bottom left of your field of view in either eye looks absolutely garbage. It's rendered at about a quarter resolution, and it's most noticeable when you're sort of looking down there, which is also physically uncomfortable, or when you're watching somebody else's capture of it. But it's a lot less noticeable when you're in it and actually doing things as sort of understood and prescribed. The vision for that kind of capability is for those once a device has eye tracking, then the sort of the no-brainer is to make that a dynamically foveated image, so that the level of resolution that you resolve an image to is dependent on where you're looking. So if you are looking down in that bottom left, that is where that high resolution thing is. But there's nothing to prevent people from being able to do that in 2 dimensions as well. So if you have 90 million pixels, yeah, you can drive them, but even then it's going to start to hurt no matter how many billion transistors you have on a die. So if you have a high fidelity image detector, like 12 megapixel sensor and reasonable processing power, like an A13 chip, which is the top of the line as of the iPhone 11, then you have the ability to be able to do quite a lot of processing about attention modeling, about the ability to be able to figure out exactly where a head is, exactly where an eye is, potentially things about the pulse, all of those other sort of peripheral circulation, tremors, those kinds of things may be able to be modelable if people can only get to be profligate enough in terms of their wastage of those cycles toward those ends. So I'm really excited because of those additional capabilities being layered in at the low level in terms of the sensor and processor baked into those things. What I'm curious about is whether people have specific visions for what can be done on those processors and how we can kind of put them to work doing something that nobody would think of as having been worth it in the past.
Interesting thing I can think of for that is I've got this, I don't know, it's just this wee thing here, which is, it's a posture device. So you sit in front of you and it just tells you if you're, got your head down your chin, which, as not being a touch typist, it's constantly telling me when I'm typing that I need to put my head up, which unfortunately means I can't type. But nonetheless, actually it's been, what it does, it just plays it splashes out a little red. You can have a voice, but basically just flashes a little light out into your eye line to tell you that you need to sort of sit up. And actually, if I do what I'm prone to do, which is when I'm reading one monitor, it's a lean over like this, it'll pick that up, and that's actually quite good. And I've noticed in the short while I've been using it, it sort of helped with general sitting. And so I can imagine how actually having a better camera would also potentially allow things like that to be done for you without needing yet another device. And I have one other thought from you, interesting side thought from your observation about the fact that, the guy without the knuckle and the hand tracking, which is, taking that the other way, and obviously somewhere down the track, that it occurs to me that if you had, say, lost some fingers, but you had the knowledge of them, you had the sort of nervous knowledge, that we might be able to put those back in a virtual space. So that's now interesting, because that now allows you to have manipulative abilities that you don't have in the physical space.
Yeah, I mean, providing you have the ability to provide consistent sensory things, like if you were to use neurological things. Oh, it's on my wife's desk, but I've got the Myo armband,
Sure.
the electromyography stuff, and the Meta folks. I can't remember the guy, Thomas. This is his first name. Doesn't have a lot. Who's sort of head of the Neuromotor Sensing division. Yeah, so that's very interesting in terms of the ability to kind of make use of muscles that are no longer connected to things and be able to kind of interpret those signals. People do a lot of stuff with reconstruction of phantom limbs within the context of therapeutic stuff to try to mitigate phantom pain, to give people to be able to give people control of like legs when they have none, by remapping their arms, things like that. There's also some really interesting stuff in the sort of direct literal augmentation space of creating supernumerary limbs that are controlled with redundant degrees of freedom present in the body. So using shoulder position to be able to control an arm to be able to press the elevator buttons would be useful in the hellscape where you have to be kind of responsible for doing that while holding a package at all times. But yeah, lots of really interesting things to do there, providing you have the sort of the tracking and processing ability to infer consistent signals that human beings can be able to kind of broadcast, sort of learn and transmit to a digital system. And so, yeah, that's where I think that these devices will be cool, if only they will give me the job to work on the R&D of them.
So Brandel, the related question then is that kind of research where it maps where your head and eyes are so that the rendering on the screen makes it look like it's 3D. For this kind of a display, is there already APIs for that, or is that something that would be reasonable to develop? And I'm wondering if we manage to come up with something useful in that space, you may be able to pitch it to Apple as, we build something useful like that, and it would be a great sales pitch for them to market the darn monitors, because not everyone is a graphics or video editor.
Yeah. So Apple obviously has things like the AR session API that is available through the front-facing camera. And so they have two essentially distinct AR session systems for the front-facing camera that is focused on facial pose and stuff like that, and then the rear-facing camera that is about the wider meshing of the scene. To the extent that it has the ability to do person segmentation, that certainly exists, but I don't think it would have the same fidelity of information as is available through the depth sensing camera that is sort of specifically calibrated for human scale features at that kind of distance. Whether that's something that's sort of out of the box or anything, that's one, I don't know, and two, veering into the sort of thing that I shouldn't say about what Apple does or doesn't do. But it's certainly very interesting.
It was publicly available, so.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. The device itself is pretty new, which it's not even available for order yet, as far as I'm aware. So I'm not sure what's available out of the box. It's not something that I'm aware of as being a public API for macOS, in the same way that it's sort of been a mainstay of, like I said, AR sessions in iOS. Apple Silicon has meant that people have an aim to unify those architectures such that it may be possible to bring some of those things back over. But I'm not aware of anybody making a macOS AR app at this point. I think that would be very interesting, but again, one of those things that a lot of people would think of as very stupid for quite a while.
Well, I mean, what would be amazing, I think, obviously, is I could imagine working an author doing something in the map, blah, blah, blah. Then, of course, I put on my headset and it's VR like you have made happen. Wonderful. And I get the space for that. But if there was an intermediary, I use this monitor, but it's also 3D for me.
Yeah.
It's not
absolutely.
full space, but it is really a useful intermediary.
Yeah, absolutely. And there have been sort of monitor space tracking APIs that people have played with. There's obviously monoscopic unless you have a lenticular monitor, and those are expensive and nobody wants them anymore. But lenticular just meaning like those kind of placemats, the holographic ones. If you have pixel grids that are aligned under those lenses, then you have the ability to create something that is an actual stereo image. And if you have face tracking on that as well, which actually is face tracking independent, if you have face tracking on that as well, then you can be much more properly keyed into that. It doesn't work when you look at it like this, because the lenticular sort of separations tend to be vertical, but we tend to hold our heads vertically or in an order look at screens anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. But yes, so people have made sort of really interesting use of it. There was a person who was doing some fun sort of HCI stuff and integrating it with, I'm not sure if it was Battlefield, but he certainly released a paintball game where you could make use of it for sort of continuous control of lean and look, to be able to look left and right. And I've always really been tickled by the idea of being able to exploit that kind of parallax effect, to be able to sort of survey more of your windowed environment, to be able to peek behind various window stackings and to get a sense of the apparent depth, because I just think there would be a lot more about the legibility of the arrangements and would have an impact on the sort of one's capacity for arrangement. Moreover, in the same way that people realized that mise-en-scène was ruined by stereographic films, because all of the framing devices where you have a dark thing that happens to be distant and a dark thing that happens to be close. When you're in a 2D image, that looks fine, but when you're in a 3D, when you're in a stereo image, it doesn't have the same impact. And so you lose a lot of the techniques. People would gain them if they had the tenacity to stick with the medium, but it was too much of a blow for most people to think that it was actually worth kind of exploring and exploiting.
Yeah.
But I think there are benefits there.
So in the last 3 minutes, first of all, I repeat the thing of please email me if you want to officially be part of this thing.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Okay, wonderful. And then also, please have a look at the document I sent today. It's a bit, forget the first many pages and forget the glossary, but the idea of using defined terms as touch points, I really want to know if you guys agree with that, or if you don't, maybe even more interestingly, why not, and how to change it. The reason is, like when I was writing the document itself, I got really annoyed because I was thinking, okay, how could I better author this in AR, VR? I was like, well, what I can do is bold some text. Like, there are different things I can do, and I use the endnotes for one little thing, and it becomes really, really difficult. But I realized that a lot of what is written is referring back to central concepts. So if I can define those once and then just write on, it would make sense. And if that can be extracted out, because the problem with my software author right now, the glossary is tied to one document. It's not system-wide or app-wide. And if it was app-wide, then it easily would be in any new document. We could choose to export only what is used. But then also, if I open a document made by someone else, maybe one of you, and you have defined some of the glossary definitions and they differ from mine, that would be useful for me to have highlighted, where I can either then say, I agree, it's roughly the same, and then just click a button, or I can amend it based on what you said and then automatically cite you. A lot of things can happen. It's just when you have, as Marcus said 1 billion times, and I 1 billion times agree with them, and I'm so glad you're highlighting it. If you just put knowledge in, it just becomes a big ocean. If you don't have islands, you can't navigate, to put it that way.
I just note that I don't think it matters too much, although it seems a bit fixed at the moment that having this concept, not even the term, say defined term, but it's more that it's just having an object. The fact that at the moment it may hinge slightly on, say, using that term, that's effectively I see as a minor limitation. There are all sorts of ways. Effectively, more metadata, always a solution. But you could map it either because it's an alternate, description of the term, or even there might be a context you might describe that implies this. But I just think having those building blocks within the body of the text becomes actually quite interesting, not least because it lends to going out to the sort of experiment that Brandel was showing earlier with the with the map space.
On that
Good luck.
note, unless there's anything else, because I have to run, I'm afraid. Have a good weekend, unless there's anything else. And I think we had a good session today. We tied a few strings together, didn't we? And I think we have to use our disparate perspectives productively. So when we don't agree on something, I'm very glad we figure out ways to say that, because we're not, producing a product, we're producing different ways of looking at things, aren't we? Look forward to Monday. Bye, guys.